Um, theology, it's not an either or, and that again is coming out of this modernist perspective that we're going to, it's going to be a marketing-driven building or whatever. I cringe when I drive into a community and I see a large structure that kind of obliterates the local neighborhood and stands in isolation to everything else. In oral culture, that would have never happened because it was harmony, the overall harmony. So we don't have the thinking paradigms to how to integrate the theology, the aesthetics, the politics of it. It's handled more like sports franchises. If we grow too big, then we move out of the community and get more land and a bigger place to go, and that's how it is. So anyway.
Okay, whoever wants to go, Dave, somebody?
Yeah, it seems like the question kind of presumes that a good theology is going to be in opposition to whatever the sociological needs or other needs of that facility to meet the needs of that facility are. So I don't think that's true. I mean, and I mostly can speak from our own experience on this. I don't claim as much expertise when it comes to facilities. But for us, when we built that yellow box, for example, for us it came out of a fundamental belief that the church is the eternal community. That the one thing that God wanted more than anything else, starting in Genesis and all the way through Revelation, wasn't just to save a person, although that's important, but really he wanted to call a group of people to himself, and those people were going to change the world. And so when we thought about what did we want to do as far as a facility, we wanted to build a facility that really would reflect community. And so we ended up with something that everybody else goes, oh, that's a community center. And so it ends up having a cafe, it ends up having a gym instead of a sanctuary, because that's where people play together. It ends up having a cyber cafe, and we have a park and ride so people can, stop there in the morning before they go to the bus and all those kind of things. So I think if you answer the question correctly theologically, I think you'll probably answer all the other questions as well. I think the places probably where our facilities are short are probably because we haven't done exactly maybe what God's wanted to the fullest extent. Does that make sense? Okay.
Kevin or more?
Yeah, I would just to echo what Davis said. The way we think about it at TAG is we look for an organization's code, their DNA. Who are we as an organization? And the buildings and the facilities need to reflect the organizational code. So for a church, part of the code is their theology. You're going to find Lutheran churches tend to look a lot different than Presbyterian churches, which tend to look a lot different than Southern Baptist churches, which tend to look a lot different than non-denominational churches. And to a large extent, that's a reflection of their code, where theology is part of that code. For some churches, the theology is very rigid and is very airtight and is extremely important to them. For others, the theology is looser. It's more inclusive. And so you find that buildings typically, when there's congruence with the code, will reflect that theology. So to me, it's not a question of should the buildings reflect the theology. It's should the buildings reflect the code. And the code then reflects how important the theology is and what the theology is of the particular church.
Okay. Anybody else?
When I'm not going to recovery meetings for people who visit churches too often, I'm visiting churches. And one of my more interesting tours was a church in Minneapolis that explained to me how the carpet pattern was chosen to reflect certain theological realities. And I thought he was pulling my arm, but a leg, whatever. But he was dead serious that they were that intentional. I don't think that's what you mean, or Marshall meant by his theology question. I would understand theology broader in that our theology informs our values, and then our values are fleshed out with awareness of sociology and aesthetics. So if our theology says we value the Creator who has made us creative people and we value creativity, then what would that look like in a way that speaks to this particular culture? Same with valuing families or anything else that's a theological conviction.